Hi, welcome back everybody. This video is all about the standing forward bend in yoga called Uttanasana. One of the main physical things that this posture does is it stretches the entire back line of the body. By the back line, I mean it stretches everything in the back of your body. We typically think of forward bends as being hamstring stretches. Your hamstrings are right back here, so you'll typically feel a lot of pulling or stretching here. But those muscles, your hamstrings, are directly connected to your calves right below and to your lower back above. And of course, those muscles keep going. They have their strong connections with muscles, tendons, and fascia up and down. You may feel it more in your hamstrings, you may feel it more in your calves, you may feel it more in your lower back, or all of these places. These are all fine places to feel the stretch in Uttanasana. The goal of this pose is not to touch your toes, number one. Some people will really easily be able to touch their toes because maybe they are very flexible, but they may also have a very long torso and very long arms compared to their legs. So when they bend forward to reach, they don't have to reach as far as someone who has much longer legs than their torso, or their legs are just very long, right? They just have a longer way to reach. And so it's more important to feel the stretches in the right places than to touch your toes or touch your feet. Even if your hands don't make it to your feet, if you are feeling the stretches in those areas in the right places, then we're on the right track. What can happen when people feel like they have to touch their toes, like that's the goal of the posture, is that if that's not possible because of tightness and or because of proportions, oftentimes the forward bend will look like this. People will think that they have to keep their legs straight, that's another point of the posture, and then that you have to touch your toes. Again, this is not a wrong thing. Some people may be able to do this and keep pretty good, safe alignment. But because of that idea, this is something that we often see in teaching, that people really round their back here and try to crane or really strain down to touch their toes. I don't want you to try this, but as I'm standing here doing this, I don't feel anything in my legs. I don't feel any stretch in my hamstrings here. I don't feel any stretch here or here. What I am feeling is a pressure. I'm feeling pressure along my back, all along here, and a little bit of strain actually in my knees because my legs are completely straight. You'll notice with what I was doing that my hips, my pelvis they were like locked back in place. They couldn't tip forward. When you come into a forward fold, your hips right here need to be able to tilt forward somewhat. They need to be able to roll forward over your leg bones because, again, your lower back here is directly connected to your hips. So as your hips tilt forward, it helps to aim your lower back towards the floor. Let me show you. So we're back in this kind of jumbo shrimp forward fold. So this is what I was doing before. My hips were being kind of pulled down and tucked underneath. Somehow this needs to happen. We need to allow the hips to tip forward. And as I did that, you noticed probably that my back became less round and more flat. In the full pose, your back will round somewhat, but we're aiming down towards the floor more. We're not just hanging here more horizontally. So how can we help the hips tilt forward like that when we forward fold? One of the reasons that they can't or that they don't for some is that we have tight hamstrings and or they're not warmed up. If these muscles back here are tight, they're gonna try to pull your hips down, back into a tuck like that. So if we're trying to do this pose with straight legs, but we don't really have the hamstring flexibility yet, but we're gonna make the legs stay straight, that tightness is going to show up higher up in the pose. One of the things that we could do to free up the hips in this case is to bend the knees or soften the knees. And I'll show you what happens. So I'll just keep doing exactly the same thing. What I would like you to watch is this area. What happens here when I bend my knees? Okay, my back is more flat now. It's not rounded. One of the reasons that can help to free up your hips is because when the hamstrings are not being pulled as far as they can be pulled end to end. When we shorten them, there can be some more slack or some more give. That extra give or slack can allow the hamstrings to let go of pulling on the hips so hard to pull them down. You might be told or hear other people talking about how that isn't really a good solution. Some people will argue that you've taken away that nice long back line stretch, and I can understand that. And a solution to that for some, okay, if we're not going to bend the knees, but we want to be able to free up the hips, is to use blocks or to use props. You could even have 2 blocks stacked on top of each other, right? If you wanted to hold this for a while and this was what you wanted to do. So this is not as deep of a back line stretch as this, right? As I fold my body closer together, all the muscles have to stretch more along the back. So by making this angle bigger, it becomes a bit gentler, a bit easier. So as long as we can keep the back more flat and allow the hips to tilt forward somewhat, then this could be a very effective and acceptable forward fold. We will also find teachers and people educated in body movement and anatomy saying that although bending the leg does take away some of the stretch in the hamstrings, that it's still possible to get a stretch in the hamstrings. The hamstrings cross not just 1 but 2 joints though. They cross and affect your knee and they help to move your knee, and your hamstrings also connect to your hips. They reach up and connect to your sit bones on the bottom. That's another joint. And so when we bend the knees in our forward fold, we've taken away potential stretch we could have gotten in the lower part of the hamstrings, like the lower fibers. We can still stretch the upper fibers, right? The upper part of the hamstrings and the lower back when we bend the knees in Uttanasana. It may be that this isn't the best hamstring stretch for you, and you could decide to bend the knees in Uttanasana and use it more as a lower back stretch, upper hamstring stretch. And there might be another posture that helps you to stretch the hamstrings along their entire length, right? Maybe something like triangle pose or pyramid pose. So let's say you didn't have blocks available, but it was the first forward fold of the day, of the class. Your hamstrings are just really tight and sore or whatever the case may be. I would much rather myself or someone else practice the standing forward bend this way, with bent knees, head relaxed, instead of this. And of course, if you did have the blocks available and it was easy enough to transition from thing to thing, then you might set up your blocks and keep them at the front of your mat about where you know your hands are going to be, and then you can stay up higher. And then the last tip I have about this posture, which is coming to mind, is when you are in the pose, you are already getting a stretch along the back of your body. You don't need to give it extra, if you will, by pulling your sit bones up or lifting your sit bones up towards the ceiling or towards the sky. That's something that could over time potentially strain your hamstring attachment, and that's unfortunately a more common injury that we find in people who practice yoga, and that's just one way that you can avoid that. So just for a sense of completion, I will show you now these different ways of practicing Uttanasana without stopping or talking to the camera, so you can get a sense of what these things might look like. So our bodies are all made differently. Not all of our poses are going to look the same way. So I'm not showing you these to show that this is more beginner or that this is more advanced, although some of those you can see require more give in the muscles, more stretchiness in the muscle. There's a lot of other factors that go into how your body can move in a particular way, other than flexibility. Sometimes it does end up being that a certain posture just doesn't work very well for somebody's body, and we end up changing it so much that it looks like a different posture. So if none of these are very comfortable, or there's like a pinching that won't go away, especially up in here, or you're not feeling the stretch in the right place, then we might need to find a different way to stretch. And finally, to wrap the video up, Everything that we've talked about in this video about Uttanasana will translate directly to the seated version of this posture, which is called Paschimottanasana. So if you are finding that you need to bend your knees in this posture to free up your hips, you are probably going to need to do that when you are sitting down. Try these things out. Let me know if you have questions, and I will see you in the next video.